I now turn to the Song of Songs, the Bible's love song. Introduction. Titles. This book comes in various titles. It's called Song of Songs. Song of Songs means something like the greatest of songs, just like Holy of Holies means the most holy place. King of Kings means greatest of kings. It's also known as Song of Solomon and Canticles. Well, who wrote the Song of Songs? Traditionally, Solomon has been taken as the author. If you look at Song of Songs 1 and verse 1, it says the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Solomon is mentioned several times in the book, chapter 1 and verse 5, chapter 3 and verse 7, and verse 9 and verse 11, and a couple of verses of chapter 8. The alternative view is Solomon is not the author, but it may have been written for or about Solomon. Note how the narrative sometimes speaks of Solomon in the third person, and that would be supportive of the view that it's about Solomon or for Solomon rather than by him. In any case, the setting does seem to be the time of Solomon. Now, the book does have some characters. You have the bride, the beautiful Shulamite maiden who shows up in chapter 1, a female voice. And then you have the bridegroom or the lover, the male voice. And then you have a chorus of bride's friends along the way who sometimes chirp in. These are called the daughters of Jerusalem, and they show up in chapter 1 and verse 8, and they appear here and there throughout the book. For example, chapter 5 and verse 9, they say, "How is your beloved better than others, most beautiful of women? How is your beloved better than others, that you charge us so?" Now, translations will help the reader figure out who's talking by adding little comments. So here I happen to be using the English Standard Version, and it throws in the word she. That's not in the Hebrew, but it indicates that it's a female voice, the bride, confessing her love. But then you have others, the chorus of bride's friends, "We will exalt and rejoice in you." And then the bride speaks again, the she. But then later on you get the he, the male voice, and then the she, and then the others, and it intermixes different voices along the way. In the King James Bible, they don't do that, and occasionally commentators that just know English would get confused because you can't always tell from the English who the speaker is, although there are forms in Hebrew that do indicate who the true speaker really is. There are a couple of characters, though, that are disputed as to whether or not they exist. One character that's disputed, there are some that have, in the past, especially Franz Delitzsch, in his commentary on Song of Songs, portrayed the story as a love triangle between the maiden, Solomon, and a third figure, the shepherd. And he made the whole story a story about that. So at the beginning of the book, according to Delitzsch, the Shulamite maiden is saying, "Let him, the shepherd, kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore the virgins love you. Draw me after you. Let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers." And she's hoping that the shepherd would come get her and save her from having to marry this lecherous old man, Solomon. Well, it turns out that not very many people have followed Delitzsch in this line of interpretation, the love triangle line of interpretation. But nonetheless, because Delitzsch is such an important commentator historically, it's worth mentioning his view. The other character, though, that's prominent by his absence is God. There is no direct reference to God in the entire book unless it occurs at Songs 8 and verse 6. So here's the NIV on Song of Songs 8:6. Talks about love is as strong as death. It burns like a blazing flame, like a mighty flame. And it has in the margin that mighty flame could be interpreted like the very flame of the Lord. Most commentators believe that mighty flame is the meaning here and that there's no direct reference to God. If that's correct, then there is no reference to God in the entire book. And again, mighty flame, some translations, flame of the Lord, other translations at chapter 8 and verse 6. Well, what are the options of interpretation? One option is that the song is an allegory. Allegory, in fact, is the traditional view. Jews saw it as an allegory of God's covenant marriage with Israel. Christians saw it as an allegory of the mystical union between Christ and the church. And there are motives for this view. One of the motives is it kind of removes or at least downplays the erotic elements in the book. Some commentators or some ancient readers found it just a little too racy, a little too almost pornographic, and if it's spiritualized, then that removes that. It also has the advantage of bringing God back into the book. The bridegroom would be God. And so God becomes a central character instead of an absent character in the book. The second option is that this is a collection of love songs or wedding songs. The allegorical view does seem to be contrary to the plain, literal sense of the text. The old adage is, if the plain sense makes good sense, seek no other sense, and taking it literally makes good sense, so why allegorize it? There's nothing in the text itself that indicates it's an allegory, and the allegorical view seems to be based on an unbiblical view of sexuality as being something evil or bad to be gotten rid of. For such reasons, almost all modern commentators take a literal view of the book, that this is love poetry. Now, if it's love poetry, is it a unified poem or is it just many independent ones? Some see in it a coherent drama, a storyline that threads its way through the entire book, though it's a little hard to maintain this consistently. Others see it as a loose collection of love or marriage songs. In any case, the basic theme of the Song of Songs is that romantic love is to be celebrated. The song teaches us that human sexuality is intended by God to be enjoyed. It gives some marital and premarital counsel. And insofar as this book gives some counsel in the area of romantic love, some categorize this book as broadly wisdom literature. Others see it more as love song. We'll complete our discussion of Song of Songs in the next video.